My name is Gary Carner, and I will serve as the moderator of this August panel. We've actually got four different panels today. I'm the author of two books on Pepper Adams. The most recent one is a biography that I've been working on and off, really, for 37 years. It's called Reflectory, The Life and Music of Pepper Adams. It was just released about a month or two ago, and it's available on pepperadams.com, which I use as the repository of the historical record of Pepper Adams. For those of you who don't know about the site, there's a ton of information there: chronologies, music, charts, interviews, all sorts of stuff, radio interviews with Pepper Adams, YouTube channel. So feel free to look at that. But we have a really great roster of people here. I also want to welcome all those who are watching as a webinar. So feel free to send questions into the panelists as we go. Please note that we've got approximately about a 3-hour time limit, and we've got 16 participants. So I'm going to be picking questions very selectively. But our special guest today is David Amram, who is a very close associate of Pepper Adams for many, many years. Met him in 1956 in that robust scene in New York, the loft scene, and worked with him for hundreds and hundreds of times over the years. And it's really an honor, David, to have you here. So we want to give you the floor to say whatever you want about Pepper, the standard of excellence, the great composer, your friendship with him, whatever you want to say. Please go ahead.
Well, I want to say, first of all, Gary, thank you for writing that wonderful book.
Thank you.
Since I knew Pepper since 1956, I found out more stuff in that book than I ever dreamed that I might have known about him, and still reading it. And also to thank all my brother and sister, because I know Claire Daly's here too, brother and sister musicians who love Pepper's work as much as the people who listen to him and everyone who's played with him. I wanted to say that very often people referred to him as a musician's musician. And interestingly enough, that's considered to be putting somebody in a slot, which means they never really made it. That's one negative way of looking at that. If you're a musician's musician, that means that only a few people can appreciate you by definition. Actually, being a musician's musician is the highest level anyone can reach, because you can't fool your wife or your husband. You can't fool your partners. You can't fool farmers. You can't fool your children. And you can never, ever fool the band, whether it's a symphony, folk group, a jazz group, Afro-Cuban group, whatever. You can't fool those who love it, who devote their lives to it, who care about it. And Pepper was one of those people, regardless of the milieus we played in, everything from the Chicago Symphony to playing at a Horn and Hard Arts restaurant in a window. Everybody appreciated Pepper, even those who'd never heard a note of jazz that they were aware of or ever heard a baritone saxophone or even knew what it was. There was something about him that was so for real, so beautiful and so devoted that even people who we wouldn't think would be qualified to have an opinion all dug him. And the only thing you have to be qualified to do to have an opinion is to be what Richard Wagner, the great composer, said: all you need for my music is an open mind and an open heart. And Stravinsky said, music expresses itself. And Sir James Galway, when I wrote a concerto for him, said, and when I told him how terrific it was that he hung out with everyone in the orchestra and treated everybody with respect, whether it was the person cleaning up the stage or the president of the symphony, he said, well, in Ireland, where I'm from, we don't endorse putting on airs. And Pepper always managed to keep it for real, to be genteel with everyone and anyone, even those who criticized him. And it was just wonderful to know him. He was so much fun, so smart, so well educated. And they say that still waters run deep. Pepper was quiet, but it wasn't because he was surly or antisocial. He was always thinking, always observing. and always figuring out more things that he could do, and also thinking in his life of how to deal with every situation and every setback, just the way he did when he would take a piece of music that would seem to be impossible and make it into better music than anyone could dream it was possible to do. And all the years that I played with him, thank heavens we were able to make those recordings that we did, because listening to him over and over again, I'm just amazed at what he created on the spot every time and made it Pepper Adams. And that's the whole idea. When I wrote the piece for the Chicago Symphony, we were doing a PBS show, and I introduced the people in the orchestra and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jerry Dodgian, and this is Al Harewood playing the drums, and Herb Bushler, all the different people who were there." And actually, for the triple concerto, it was Brian Torf was playing bass. And then I said, "And the master of the baritone saxophone, Mr. Pepper Adams." Pepper stood up with a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and he said to all the members of the Chicago Symphony, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to play with an orchestra of notes." Took a swig of beer and sat down, and the whole orchestra cracked up. And from that moment on, it was just easy to do, because he set the whole tone right away that we were also going to have some fun, even though it was really hard music. And the last movement of that is up on YouTube, thank heavens. And you can see Pepper and Jerry sitting there quietly with the symphony. And it was their turn to play. Look out. They just spread that beautiful light, that magic that jazz has, music that comes from the heart. And Pepper showed me, as a symphony composer, classical composer, if you wish, that whether or not you used a note of jazz in what you did when you were putting it down on paper, every note counts. What they call in vernacular choice notes, which means you have a choice of which notes or notes to choose. Pepper always chose those perfect notes. And he was so wonderful. When I did my opera 12th night, we were playing at the Village Gate, and he said, "Man," he said, "I could hear everything in that opera, even though it was more neoclassical than jazz, because the older composers also played and also improvised and also were part of their society." And Pepper, as a person off the bandstand, was just the same person he was on the bandstand. He kept it for real. He kept committed. He was gracious to people. If any young person wanted to know something, he wouldn't say, "Go shove it. You can't help me out. Get out of my face." He was not that way. And none of the masters, Dizzy and Charlie Parker and Monk and all those people that we knew, were that way either. So for all the young people who are watching this, if you meet people like that, they have constitutional right to be swinish, but hang out with somebody else. And I was lucky enough to know Pepper, and I hope that all of you will listen to his records and see other musicians and other people in a different light, and realize that we're all in the same boat. And if you're worried because you're 24 years old and your career counselor tells you, "No offense, but you're 24, you're too old, you suck," forget about it. They have a constitutional right to be that way, but hang out with somebody else. Because I always tell people at 91, one of the reasons why I'm so healthy and still able to try to play jazz and to conduct and to compose and write music and keep doing what I'm doing is very energizing, because desperation is very energizing. We're all in a desperate situation, but so was Mozart, and so was every jazz artist that we ever know. And all of those people overcame those obstacles and continued. And Pepper, even when he was mortally ill, continued to play up until the last minute, better than ever. He was a great inspiration. And I thank you. My 15 minutes are up, and I have someone else to share this with. So I just want to sell all blessings. And I'm going to watch this and hope that all of you who are watching, especially the young musicians, hang in there. Whatever you do to pay your rent has no bearing on your value as a musician, a composer, an artist, or person.
Thank you so much, David. I have a question for you. What was your last gig with Pepper?
The
How late
last,
was it in his illness?
I think the last one we played was about a year before he passed away.
Okay.
And he naturally, it was the same when I worked with Betty Carter about 2 months before she died. She never told anyone that she was ill, and Pepper never said anything about that till the word got out.
Where was the gig? In New York City, I assume, right?
Yes, it was in New York, and I'd have to look in my old appointment book to remember,
Yeah.
because I don't want to spread misinformation. But there was so many that we played, and remember we had a guitar player named Charlie Chin who was fantastic. He said, "I don't play jazz," and Pepper said, "Just play you, just be you." That's what jazz was about. And Charlie, getting that approbation from Pepper Adams, dared to play and got better and better and better. And of course, realized that a C dominant seventh is a C dominant seventh, no matter what form of music it comes in. And that Pepper was playing all of those wonderful harmonies that he began, as so many Detroiters did, with the great Barry Harris. And from there, developed further. I even have things he wrote down showing me things that I could practice using that famous diminished scale that he and Thad Jones and everyone played that was just so terrific. But it wasn't like a bunch of real estate tax lawyers getting together and having a conference. It was always about the moment, being inspired by the moment and knowing what to do, and not playing too long. Even though he could play for a half hour and kill you, he managed to keep it short. So that's what I'm going to try to do.
Okay. Can I ask you another question? Can you do you mind talking about that loft scene when you met him and playing all those incredible spots? I mean, New York was so alive then.
Well, we were playing at a guy named Ken Karp's, and
especially there. Yeah.
To come, Oscar Pettiford came, Monk came, and I was playing with Mingus, and he came up, and I was just about to turn 25, and here I was with all these giants, and they were just so nice and so warm. We would play sometimes for 24 hours. Ken had a really nice place, and his wife Sylvie was so gracious to all of us. And Pepper came, and he said, "Oh, some bebop French horn. It's about time." And we became friends. And he was the one that told me about Barry Harris and thinking about the different way of looking at harmonies and how all the musics had a certain soulfulness and beautifulness and were supposed to tell a story. You weren't just supposed to play hot licks. You were supposed to be telling a story and expressing yourself. And that's what Lester Young said to all saxophone players. Now I'd like to hear your story. And the same thing that Kurt Vonnegut told me when I was writing a book. He said, "David, write the way you talk." And I always tell composers, be yourself, tell your story. Arnold Schoenberg's great. He already did that. Do what you've got to do. Or what Sonny Rollins told me when I heard him play, and then worked with him a little when he used to play with Mingus, and we played together at a college. And I said, "Sonny, this was 1955. Here's a guy playing dap, 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 da, dap, dap, da, dap, da, dap, da, dap, dap. 4 minutes, he's just playing one note. What's up with that?" He said, "Don't put that cat down. That's the best he can do. He's saying what he does to feed his family. That's his thing. So if you don't dig it, he's already done it. Do something else." Some good lessons. And Pepper was one of those guys that always, as they used to say in the vernacular, would pull your coat to make you feel you were okay but you could do better if you were honest and tried to improve and tried to do it your way. And if your way wasn't as good as you wish it were, you could improve that by practicing and hanging out with those who were better than you dreamed you'd ever be.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, David, for being here, and really appreciate your input. Kenny, do you want to step in? Does anybody have any questions for David before Kenny starts? Kenny, it's all yours. Kenny Berger, who was in the first roundtable a month ago and had so many wonderful things to say. And I took him literally. He said I could talk for months or something. So I said, okay, well, come on back. So I put a lot of pressure on him here, I think.
Yeah, big mistake. You know, when you were talking about Pepper and I guess what David was saying about basically being internally motivated, I guess, because I get a vibe from a lot of recent players who come out of the sausage factory that the primary consideration is to not make any mistakes in public because it'll mess up your brand. And it reminds me of something that Bob Brookmeyer always used to say. He used to say, there are two kinds of people in the world, people who want to be somebody and people who want to get something done. I think that applied to Pepper, and it was also great that you mentioned Jerry. You know, it's kind of, you know, those two, it's hard to think of one without the other because they were also such great players and great people, and two of the wittiest guys ever. I remember at the fundraiser for Pepper when he was sick, and Kobe Narita, what was it? It was a jazz loft. What was the name of that place? And the jazz forum, not the forum, but they had this benefit for Pepper, and Frank Foster was playing there with his big band, and Jerry was playing lead alto, and Frank would say he would talk about when he played in Thad and Mel's band and sat between the two of them, and he'd say sometimes like one of them would say something and he would just think nothing of it, and then about a week later he'd think of it and just crack up, you know, because it was always such, you know, a great humor going on between the two. And you know, I don't want to take the focus off Pepper, but you know, Jerry is 91.
Jerry Dodgen, for those who don't know. Yeah.
You know, he was the greatest road rat in the world. You know, the bus would go into a ditch, or you know, a couple of wheels would fly off, and Jerry would just observe the scene and say, "Ha, another first." So that was, you know, and Jerry Dodgen. Anyway, and I also had the pleasure of hearing Dave's group at the top of the gate one time with Pepper, and I was thinking about also Pepper, and you know, Pepper, like David said, the still waters run deep, man. Pepper was very well read and very well acquainted with a lot of different kinds of music, and he also had this great sense of humor. And you know, the classic way that jazz musicians, it's at least since bebop, have expressed humor is by quoting. And that's kind of a dying art. You know, I remember like around 20 years ago, I gave a presentation to a bunch of graduate jazz history students on Charlie Parker's use of quotes. And they were going, what, you know, right over their heads. What is that? Why did they do that? Where did, you know, and basically because they didn't recognize any of the tunes, you know, and that art's gonna die out, because when younger guys come up, and if they go back 20, 30 years in the pop music, there aren't any melodies to quote. You know, good luck with that. But, and the idea that Pepper, you know, it came from the heart, it was real, but also the intellect was going. You know, I don't know, people say about, you know, some people say, you know, you can't think and play at the same time, but there were certain people that, you know, the brain was in there, like Pepper and Thad, and you know, Bob Brookmeyer was another one. You know, there was a serious mind at work, you know, and some of Pepper's quotes even went over most musicians' heads. You know, I was listening to you know, Gary Spullion and I have talked about one of our favorites where coming out of the bridge of Alone Together, he quotes "Springtime for Hitler." Fat Tuesday record. And on another thing on the Fat Tuesday record, he starts a chorus on rhythm changes with this. Maybe David will recognize it, maybe Roger, but. Anybody recognize that? Starts right on a chorus. It's the Berceuse, the cradle song from the Firebird by Stravinsky. And the reason I recognize it was because my classical training was on bassoon. It's a famous bassoon solo. And this is what stuff like that. I was told about hanging out at that Helen Merrill session where they did things associated with Charlie Parker and Gershwin, and I'm listening to this lick, a playback, and Pepper plays this lick. It sounds familiar. It's like corny, very diatonic. The next chorus, he repeats the same thing against the same harmony up a third. And it was like this, what the hell is that? And he said, oh, that's from a Jaromir, that's In Dreams I Kiss Your Hand, Madame, from a Jaromir Weinberg or operetta, Oh, silly me, of course, And again, as I talked last time, we never talked about the saxophone. Like, to this day, like 50 years after I first met him, I have no idea what the opening or the facing was on his mouthpiece or what kind of reeds he used. We talked about books. We talked about classical music. He turned me on to Arthur Honegger's symphonies and, Joseph Skoretsky's novels and stuff like that. And I was trying to, I remembered another great line that he delivered once. There was a meeting at Local 802 at the Union. It was something about, I can't remember what it was, to get jazz music, the Union more involved with jazz musicians, to get paid scale or what, just, to get more involvement with jazz at Local 802. And a bunch of people were talking about, well, we can't get foundation, we should be getting foundation grants and like this, like that. And Pepper stood up and said, I'm strongly in favor of grants for jazz musicians, or any other good Scotch for that matter. I remember, and again, what Pepper, when I first heard it, what it meant to me was it was like a liberation of the baritone, because coming up, in the 60s, when I started to play the saxophone in the late 50s, I'm listening to jazz in the 60s, and I want to play this more hard swinging music. I'm listening to Blakey and Horace Silver and stuff like that. And nobody's playing the baritone in that context, as far as I knew. Jerry Mulligan was all I knew. And Carney later on. And all of a sudden, man, one night on the Alan Grant show, he played this track from a Donald Byrd album with Pepper and Philly Joe Jones, and I said, oh man, this, there's a way to do this, and let me see, I have, I thought of I have a different way of thinking of a lot of the things that happened, because since the first time I spoke with you on this roundtable, I read your book, Gary, and there's so much incredible research and so much that it also bared out a lot of some of the anecdotes that I remembered, because considering the time when some of these things happened and the way I was living back then, it was nice to know that I didn't hallucinate some of those things, that some of those stories were really good, were really true, but I'm reminded of one fascinating story. Well, first of all, okay, this is another story. It's kind of peripherally related to Pepper. You mentioned Duke Pearson and his proclivity to, he was kind of a ladies' man, as they used to say, right?
Right, in the book, I discussed that.
Yeah. So Pepper called me to sub in Duke's band one time, and I do it, and he calls me the next day, and he says, I said, what's up, Pepper? He says, I'm just calling to make sure you're okay. I said, what happened? Well, why? Did you hear I was sick or something? And he says, no. He says, just, Duke can kind of be weird and, mess with people's heads. I just want to make sure you're okay. Did anything? I said, no, nothing strange, other than during this solo feature on Sophisticated Lady, which I was sight reading, when I got about two-thirds through the chart and I turned the page, there was nothing there. That was about the only weird thing, But there was this other a time where we were rehearsing before the gig with Duke up at the Half Note. They had moved uptown. I think it was on 54th Street. They had a newer. And we walk into the rehearsal, and there's this young blonde woman sitting there on a stool with an acoustic guitar. She looked like a younger, hotter version of Mary Travers from Peter, Paul, and Mary. And we're rehearsing, and we stop. Duke stops and he says, well, between tunes or between sets, so-and-so, she's going to sing a couple of her songs. And Joe Shepley pipes up from the trumpet section. He says, Duke, he says, is this the real thing? What do you mean? He says, is this the real thing or not? He says, what do you mean? He says, because if it's the real thing, leave us the book so we can keep the band going, because every time you fall in love, the band breaks up for a while. So if you're in love again, leave us the book so we can keep the band going. So that was a kind of a good Duke Pearson story. But the one other thing I remember was a story that Pepper told me. But this shows a lot about Pepper and about how the regard he was held in by another great musician that we all admired. He told me one night he went to see, Coltrane was playing at the Vanguard, and he went to see him. This is probably later. This is maybe at the time Ascension came out, around that time. He goes down in there, and there are all these other horn players, saxophone players on the bandstand. It's like a free-for-all, and he couldn't hear a note Coltrane was playing. It was like a total, it was just totally out of control. And he goes back in the kitchen to say hello to Coltrane between sets, and at one point he says to Coltrane, John, he says, how can you let these people just get up there and take over your bandstand like that? And Coltrane, with a look of resignation on his face, said to him, how can you stop them? Now, think of that, because, first of all, the way, especially with, everybody with the political stuff today, and the way the jazz avant-garde was going in those days, you'd think, well, what do you think Coltrane would have said to Pepper? Yeah, you au-fait motherfucker. No, he gave him an honest answer. In other words, Pepper didn't pull punches either. Pepper saw that going on, and he was disappointed. And he wanted to, he kind of, I guess he felt some compassion for Coltrane, and maybe he felt that this wasn't all his doing. And Coltrane respected Pepper enough to, not get defensive and just give him a totally honest answer to that. And I thought that, thinking about that, I think that says a lot about both of them.
That was the nature of Pepper's friendships with everybody, with you, with David, with Ken Kellett, right? I mean, a very straight shooter.
Yeah.
And people respected him so immensely. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And
of course, he and Coltrane were all friends. They recorded in 56, 57.
Yeah, they recorded the two baritones album with Cecil and Coltrane, and then the Gene Ammons record where Coltrane played Ira Gittler's alto. 4 saxes on that record. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's all I've got, for now. And
Fantastic.
Like that terrible song says, "Misty watercolored memories." Anyway,
great anecdotes, Kenny, as expected. Thank you so very much.
That's back. It's good to see everybody.
So we're going to jump ahead. Bob Blumenthal is here, and I was corresponding with him by email a few days ago. And I said, Bob, you know the 50s and 60s so well. Would you like to say a few words about Pepper Adams? Because he wrote the liner notes to that Duke Pearson thing on Uptown. And he said, sure, I'd love to. So, Bob, take it away.
Well, I'm humbled with so many great baritone players here, and David Amram, and it's great to see everybody. I hadn't planned on saying too much. One thing I was going to bring up, and I have to thank Kenny Berger, although I still have a question. About a year ago, when I was talking to Gary about early chapters of the book, I said, in my mind, Pepper Adams quotes, I kiss your hand, in dreams I kiss your hand, madame, on a record. And for the life of me, I cannot find this. I think it's one from the end of his career. And you said, what is this tune? And I went on YouTube, and Bing Crosby recorded it in 1931 or something. How I knew this tune, I have no idea.
But I thought it might have been from the live date on Uptown, or maybe.
But then I would have recognized. When I heard it, I said, this is one of the most fantastic quotes in
It was
history.
the Helen Merrill
Um,
record. It was the
yeah.
Helen Merrill record called "Chasing the Bird," Gershwin.
Okay. All right. Well, I wasn't looking in vocal albums, but I will.
Yeah,
And when I get off, I'm heading right there. Um, but I was going to say maybe it was another baritone player. Maybe it was one of you who did it. But anyway, I among the things I've been working on lately is a photography and video exhibit with a friend of mine who is a little younger than David Amram, but much older than me. Grew up in Boston, and he started going to clubs in 1950 and taking photographs then, and he's got memorabilia from listening to Nat Hentoff on the radio in Boston. So this led me to think about how, as somebody who's got opinions, they were all formed someplace, and they're formed in the early listening. We all do, I believe. So my opinion. So where did I get my notion of Pepper Adams? And I can pinpoint it. I live in a community with a great public library, had a great record collection, including current albums. I started listening to jazz in 1960 when I was 13. And within the first year, two of my favorite albums were Blues and Roots by Charles Mingus and the Thelonious Monk Orchestra at Town Hall. And that's where I heard Pepper Adams before I heard the Donald Byrd records. The Catwalk, which is the one with Philly Joe on drums that Kenny Berger probably heard, was the first one that caught my attention. But hearing his horn in a larger group, to me, that was the full Pepper Adams experience, as I came to realize over the years. As great as the small group albums are, when I first heard them live with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, and heard what he did up against a large ensemble, really, I don't know, maybe Serge Chaloff had his moments with Woody Herman that might have been the seeds of that kind of all-encompassing experience, but it really, I thought, set him off so perfectly. And it's just a shame that there weren't more projects like the Canadian saxophonists, where they built orchestral albums and concerts and what have you around his horn.
Or Denny Christensen.
Primary focus. And I don't know that I have much more to say. I'm really curious to hear what other folks have to say.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So we can move into the next panel. I want to hear from Roger Rosenberg, who actually knew Pepper when he moved to New York City. I interviewed Roger 30 years ago. That's how far back my research goes. Take it away, Raj. Is his mic on?
You're unmute, Roger.
And thank you, Bob.
Okay. Is that okay now? Can you hear me?
You're good, man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's true. I did get to meet Pepper early on, and I'll talk about that. But just like Kenny, I started playing the baritone when I was very young. I think I was around 12 years old. I'd been an alto player, and I wasn't that good. But when I switched to the baritone, it took off, and it became like very important to me. And of course, for the first couple of years, the first baritone player I heard was Jerry Mulligan. And that was the sound that I came to believe was the sound of the baritone. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to go to some wonderful performing arts camps. And I spent 3 summers at a camp called Ramblerny, which was in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And the music department was run by Phil and Chan Woods. And Phil would invite all these amazing players. Well, first of all, the teachers there. We had Manny Album, we had Johnny Carisi, we had Chris Swanson, Vic Morosco, a great saxophone teacher there. And people like Clark Terry and Richard Davis and Jerome Richardson and Danny Bank. We played with Elvin Jones. I was 15 years old when he came up there and played with us. I met Jerry Dodgian up there, Morgana King. So anyway, the first record I heard with Pepper was More Blues Than the Abstract Truth. And to be honest with you, when I first heard it, I was kind of like put off because I was so used to Jerry Mulligan's sound. And I didn't understand like what Pepper's sound was, but not too long after I became a huge fan of his. And I certainly think, when I think of the most important baritone players of, the last many, many years, I think of Harry Carney, Jerry Mulligan, Pepper Adams, and my good friend Ronnie Cuba. To me, there are many other great players, but from my point of view, they were, they defined a lot of different things and they were pretty great. And as you say, I met Pepper. I went to hear Thad Jones Mel Lewis Band about a year after they started. So they were brand new and it was just absolutely amazing. I must have been 15 or 16 or something. And at a certain point, later on in the 70s, when I moved into the city as a professional, I got to know Pepper a little and I called him up and I went to take a lesson with him. And it ended up not being a real lesson. It was like a whole afternoon. I went out to his place in Brooklyn and we hung out, and I wish I could remember musically what we talked about, but it was basically just like a wonderful hang. And I remember thinking to myself, unfortunately, it wasn't the nicest apartment he lived in. And I remember thinking to myself, how can this giant of a musician, I mean, he should be living in like on Park Avenue or something like that. So, it was actually, a little bit upsetting to me. And then another great experience I had with him was I went to hear him in the Village with the pianist Hod O'Brien. It was like a quartet. And as young people do, we had our horns with us. And you can imagine a young guy carrying around a baritone saxophone. I think you're trying to tell someone something when you're doing that. And you go to a club, and he invited me to sit in. And it was terrific. I had a great time with him. I just, I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about what did he bring to the music. Well, as David brought up, he was one of the first people that I really heard use the diminished scale in a way that wasn't just a couple of different licks. He seemed to find a way that was very much a part of his voice. And it was also his time feeling and his aggressiveness. And, what can I say? He was just a wonderful guy. And one other sort of indirect experience I had, I've been playing with Chet Baker for a while. And Chet said, well, I got a couple of gigs coming up. I think one's in Ohio and one's at the Keystone Corner in San Francisco, and Pepper's going to do it. And I said, great, But after the week in Ohio, he calls me up and he says, for some reason, Pepper doesn't want to do the Keystone Corner. So I flew out to the Keystone Corner, and fortunately for me, someone recorded that, and that has actually been released some years ago as a recording. So sort of in an indirect way, he really kind of helped me. And what can I say? He's one of the great baritonists of all times, and you don't tire listening to him.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, can I ask a question of
course,
Roger?
anybody can ask a question at any time, please. Please, I want this to be an open forum.
Yeah, and this might not be just to Roger, but I mean, all of us as Barry players have, we all play as a soloist, but also in big bands quite a bit. That's one of the things we do. And, Pepper certainly was most well known as his, as a great jazz soloist, but he played baritone saxophone in a lot of different large ensembles. And Roger, I'm just wondering if listening to some recordings of Pepper playing ensemble stuff in any way influenced your approach to playing, like with Mincer's band or whatever? If anybody has any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear that.
Um, I'm not really sure that that really influenced me. I have a whole opinion about what the baritone player does in the section. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about that now under these circumstances, but I'm just happy to say the baritone is a really multi-dimensional instrument. I mean, sometimes I'm playing with the bass, sometimes I'm playing with the bass trombone, sometimes I'm playing with the sax section, sometimes with the brass section. And I think of the horn differently in all those different situations. If I'm playing with the bass, I feel like I'm a bass. When I'm playing with the bass trombone, I feel like, the bass trombone is a little brighter than my sound. So we're putting a sound together of a little brighter sound and a little darker sound. And I want it to be like one sound working together. And I've done a lot of thinking about that. But you're right, Pepper played in many sections, but at that time, I think I was more interested in listening to him as a soloist.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead. Of course.
Yeah,
Anybody can jump in at any time, please.
because, well, it's about the same time that Pepper started calling me to sub for him on Thad and Mel's band. This is not about me, but at that time, part of my story is I was just starting to also get into arranging at that time. And I used to go to the Vanguard every Monday, and if I can get there early enough, I'd sit on the banquette right next to Pepper. And see, I was almost cheating. I figured like when the first few times he finally sent me in to sub for him, I felt like I wasn't even sight reading because I knew the stuff, But I'd be listening to Pepper play in this section and soloing and listen to what Thad was doing. And from an arranger standpoint, the way Thad was writing for the saxes, most of the time when the saxes had soli passages and stuff that featured the sections, the baritone almost, except for Duke Ellington, the baritone almost always doubled the lead alto down an octave. Right. With Thad's writing, it was either 5 parts or sometimes the doubled part would be in the 4th tenor. So the baritone always had its own notes. It was much more fun, to play. Man, all of a sudden you had really functional chord tones, and also it was a little more streamlined. So it demanded a less of a kind of a fat anchored kind of a sound and a more kind of a streamlined sort of a sound. But as a baritone player, you have to be able to change the weight of your sound to fit with that, and with what you're playing. But Pepper was able to adapt to that, but he still always sounded like himself. But I think he was the perfect. That was the perfect kind of sound for that kind of section with Thad's, where the baritone was independent, and the rest of the section wasn't like subservient to the lead alto, because you wanted it, the thing that made it really sound great was the 5 parts that were going on. That's that. Okay.
Kenny, when you played with the band, I got a question for Kenny Berger. Roger, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not interrupting. Pepper told me that the great thing about Thad's writing is that there was always little melodies that he was playing. It wasn't just block chords or whatever, the traditional approach of big band writing. When you sat in, did you experience that?
Yeah, Thad wrote the kind of Thad's inner parts were the kind where kind of everybody felt like they had the most fun part.
Yeah, that's what Mosca said, right?
I used to sit next to the 4th tenor in Thad's band. And 4th tenor parts, man, they're like a joke, right? And even the 4th tenor parts made sense. All right, and so yeah, he paid more attention to the lines. And he did a few things that are not considered to be according to the rule. There would be a repeated notes in a part, and it would make it a little difficult to play, but yeah, the feeling was like, man, the lines were just great, and it was easier to feel the spirit and get in, like, yeah, man, I'm really contributing to this too, I'm not just kind of letting the lead alto player sit on my shoulders.
Yeah, that's what John Mosca told me. He went around and he felt the same way, that he thought his part was the greatest part in the band. Went around and everybody felt the same way. It was just extraordinary, that writing.
Yeah.
And I agree strongly with Kenny concerning, the different volume of the baritone in terms of the section. I've always felt like if I'm playing with the lead alto, that my job is to give the support under that lead alto player. So I might play a little bit louder than the dynamic says, just to give him that support. And if I'm playing things where I'm playing the low notes, the bass notes, the chords, etc., I will often play them a little stronger than what the dynamic says, so that I can establish the pitch actually for the whole band, and give them something to sit on.
The thing
So,
about Thad's writing was you felt like you were part of the sax section. Because
yeah,
a lot of writers, man, a lot of writers use the baritone like a sledgehammer.
yeah,
The alto and tenor play, everybody see these. I see Claire and Kevin nodding, right?
yeah,
You know, the altos and tenor players are having a ball, and
right.
we're just bumping away there. And in Thad's music, you really felt like you were participating. And one thing about Thad's writing and Ellington's writing was, if you listen to it, they almost never double the baritone with the bass trombone.
Mhm.
Almost never. And coincidentally, their bands swing a lot more, and everything is more transparent. I wonder why that is.
And the
And
other thing is,
sorry.
Pepper, as a baritone player, I'm sure Kenny and many of us can all say, we did plenty of blues solos in big bands. Let's give the baritone player a blues solo or something, to do. So, but Pepper, he was playing on everything. So in a way, he kind of opened up the whole concept of being a soloist for a baritone player, and we have to thank him for that very much.
I think there's so much experience that we glean from doing these things, like echoing what Kenny and Roger were saying. Um, you know, what I find is, maybe I'm being self-evident, but playing baritone in a big band, it's kind of like you have to do your homework for what the characteristic of that band is. If you're playing bassy, you got to get that bassy baritone sound, the Charlie Folks kind of thing. If I'm playing Thad Jones charts or something where I knew that Pepper was an integral part of the group, I'm kind of channeling his tonal concept even within the section. If I'm playing, Bob Mincer stuff or something, then it really is all about locking in with the bass trombone and the bass, because very often that's kind of your unit, and kind of knowing, as both of you have said, where your particular function is and how much force you should use, but also, always making sure whoever you're playing with, that you've got that blend, so that, again, self-evident, you're so much better together than you would be if that part was only written for one of you.
Kenny, were you going to say something, or should we jump to Jim Hartog at this point? As we're falling a little behind schedule. Anybody else have any comments before we jump to Jim?
There was one question in the chat, Gary. I don't know if you want to address that now or keep going with the panelists.
Yeah, I'm having issues finding them, so maybe you can share them with us with me as we go. What was that question?
Sure. This is from Paul Tynan. He says, everybody, thanks for doing this. It's been very exciting with listening to the stories. And he says, Gary, last time we chatted about Pepper, you talked about his teaching and his use of Jerry Coker's Patterns for Jazz book. I'm wondering if there's been any more insight to how he went about teaching in the very rare times he did, and if there are any other documented materials or methods that he used when he taught.
No, I don't know anything else other than what my interviewee told me about that one lesson. Pepper, as Roger will tell you, rarely taught, didn't admit that he taught, wouldn't accept any money for teaching, and only taught a few select people. The first person was Curtis Fuller, really. I mean, he shaped Curtis Fuller. I talk about that in the book. But no, I can't speak to Jerry Coker's patterns, and that was really just part of the lesson. plan that Pepper probably spontaneously came up with that day for that guy. But I appreciate Paul for asking. But apparently Pepper really admired those patterns in that book. Of course, Pepper had his own patterns, but they were his, correct?
Absolutely.
Anybody want to follow up on that?
Pepper actually wrote, I still have the piece of paper, a whole, just on one sheet, he wrote me his song Patrice and some of those other fantastic tunes he had with all the chord changes. Same way that Dizzy and Monk had written out stuff for me. I said to Monk one time, I'm trying to learn off, this is 1955. I said, I'm trying to learn off minor, but every time you play it, nobody doing what you do. And he said, well, they should have asked me. And he wrote down exactly every single chord with the sharp nines and the flat, rate, every kind of, he had his own way of doing it, but every single thing was just like someone who designed the Verrazzano Bridge. If you had that architecture sketch, you knew exactly how to make the building. He wasn't just putting his arm on the piano unless it was hitting a G flat sequence. There was a reason for what he did. And Pepper was the same way. So he wrote out, I guess what you say were patterns, but I could see when he was doing it, he was just thinking of something to show me how he could use that famous diminished scale of D natural C, going from the top D, C, B natural, A, G flat, A flat, G flat, F natural, E flat, and then down to the D, as either a dominant seventh on the A flat seventh or the D seventh. For those who may be listening that aren't musicians, forgive me, but I'm saying this for all the people that doesn't make any difference, because as long as you can feel what the music is about. But anyway, he showed me that, and he said, man, with this scale, you can do just about anything. But it was never playing scales. It was showing that with a certain one of 10,000 different things that he knew, you could figure out how to do something else using that as a map quest to go out there and come back and do it. And I started listening to all the guys from Detroit and realized, boy, that's something that everybody had, but it wasn't where like a book of real estate taxes, or where you had to get a PhD in jazz education. It was just a way, just like playing the blues or anything else, of incorporating some kind of a system so you had some idea of what you could do and what you could hear. And I only mention that because in my saxophone concerto, or Lord Buckley, I had that coming down the saxophone. Everything was written out, every note. Because Ken Radnowski, who was a killer classical player, said, you got to write it out for me. So when I wrote that out, I put down one gigantic scale that I put down in the score of the C.F. Peters published, this scale taught to me by Pepper Adams. So I was acknowledging his gift rather than stealing it. It's not that hard if someone shows you something and you use it to say thank you. That's not, doesn't take that much of an effort just to do that. It's called honoring a gift rather than being a thief. And there are enough thieves in the world, so we don't have to add to that collection. And Pepper, when he would use those quotes, it was the same thing. He never, it wasn't something I don't think that he planned. He did that when I was playing. I would hear different things from not only Stravinsky and Bartok, but also from pop tunes and folk songs and little things he would just throw in the very middle. I said, wow, never thought of that. Paquito de Rivera still does that today. And there are PP players that do that as well. But Pepper, I don't know, in his teaching, he was always teaching if you hung out with him, just listening to him talk and seeing the things that he did, and then occasionally would write something down, was really quite amazing.
David, I've got to ask you, on behalf of all the baritone players that are here now and will join us soon enough, you told me that you were dedicating a sonata for baritone saxophone and piano to Pepper Adams. Have you ever thought of finishing it?
Not yet, but I know Joe. I told that to Joe Temperley and to Cecil Payne before he passed away,
You know, Aaron's licking his chops right now. I
Right.
can tell.
and also to so many other people, Gary Samilian and Aaron, whom I played with 10 years ago, with which I forgot that it was him until today with the piece that I wrote when I wrote the triple concerto. I got Jerry and Pepper because I had known them for so long, played with both of them, and they were so terrific. I knew that together they would be doing something that would be, I didn't know what I was going to do, frankly. The American Symphony wanted me to have show up with a quintet and accompany Christmas carols while the orchestra was playing. I said, I'm not being disrespectful, but I think having these great musicians and your great musicians do something together, like a concerto grosso, would be a lot hipper. This was 1970, before they were doing such a thing. They said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, why not make it a triple concerto for woodwind quintet, which you can get from your orchestra, all those great players that never sit in front of the orchestra, a brass quintet, which you got in the orchestra, and a jazz quintet, and have them all be of equal importance. That would show, first of all, that the players of symphonies are also creative and artists who deserve to be soloists, and show that the jazz ensemble can do anything and everything, and they can be part of it. Not saying it's the same thing, but
Right,
have
right.
that one language.
So I'll take that as a maybe.
Okay. Well, the piece came off great, and Jerry and Pepper both played up a storm, and the Japanese conductor, fortunately, thank heavens, actually knew how to conduct and knew the music, and it was terrific, and it's been played all over the place. But the, the reason I did that was because I thought every instrument, when Adolph Sax invented the saxophone, it, it was a band and an instrument, and then when the Arlesian suite, when they used that for in the famous Arlesian suite at Bizet, that became, there was a saxophone part and that a tenor saxophone, I believe, and then of course Glier and so many other composers began to use the saxophone in orchestras. Then it graduated from the band to the orchestra, and then when all those killer saxophone players, soprano saxes, which was considered to be a freak instrument. Sidney Bechet started playing that when I met him in Paris in '55. He told me of all the great old timers that no one knew about who played those instruments, including great French horn players, since I was playing jazz French horn. There's no such thing as a jazz instrument until someone takes that instrument and plays jazz or plays their own music on it. So I think Pepper opened up the door for everyone to realize what an important instrument that was, along with Jerry and so many other great players, including a lot of people that are with us today. And we're beginning to see that every instrument, everybody can play jazz, but you don't go to a pawn shop and buy a violin and say you're going to play with the New York Philharmonic to play the Beethoven Concerto. You got to spend 20, 30 years, your whole life learning it. And it's the same thing with jazz. It's an art, a language, a lifetime study, and it's classical, great music. So that's a long-winded answer.
Thank you, David. Jim, are you ready? We've been trying to get to you for a while now. Jim Hartog? Is he offline?
Yeah, he looks frozen. Maybe Gary.
Okay.
Maybe his connection's bad. We could come back to him,
All
perhaps.
right, so let's jump ahead to Dale Fielder then. Dale, welcome. How you doing? I think he's muted too. There you go.
There we go.
Welcome.
Well, hey, Gary. Hey, thanks for having me on the panel.
Pleasure. Guys, you've recorded a lot of Pepper tunes.
Well, I love Pepper. Just really honored to be amongst many of you are just people I have admired for years. And what's up, Kevin, Claire, Rick. Yeah, well, for me, I wish that I had the opportunity to actually know Pepper, which I didn't. So thank you for your book. But
Yeah, I'm ready.
I guess my connection
Okay.
is that
Yeah.
he's actually the reason why
There
I'm
seems to be a
and he was there was a group of three saxophone players I heard like in 1962 when I was yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was
Yeah.
motioning to Jim, actually.
Oh,
Go
don't-
ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, don't. Oh, man, I feel like I'm.
Yeah, we was trying to
Wait.
get you there, Jim.
Yeah, you froze, so we jumped ahead to Dale. You want to wait until Dale's done?
Okay, well, yeah.
Go ahead, Dale.
Okay, well, the reason why I'm playing jazz is mainly there were three saxophone players I heard when I was 6 years old. I had an older brother in the Air Force who was a saxophonist, and moved into my room when I was coming out of kindergarten, going into first grade. And that was like 62. And I was able to tell two of them that they were the reason why I'm playing this music. One was Sonny Rollins and Jackie McLean, but the other was Pepper Adams. I heard Pepper at the very beginning of my love affair with jazz, and it's just I wish I had had the opportunity to tell him that. And I think what I heard right away, I think all of us as saxophonists would agree the greatest saxophonist that ever played was Charlie Parker. And I just see that's what Pepper very consciously did, especially reading your book, that he, took Bergh and put that on the baritone sax. And that's something I was very attracted to right at the beginning. And it's weird, man, because for like until year 2000, the only Pepper I heard consisted of three records. The Donald Byrd, Off to the Races, and the Bird in Hand, and then that weird record he did with Sonny Red. That had the Watkins production, and that's all I heard. But that was enough for me to just love this playing. I was like, I didn't have a baritone at first, but I said, how can I take this and put it on tenor, put it on alto? I want to play the way Pepper plays, And until 2000, I was finally able to get a baritone sax. And I remember at Stein-on, the legendary Stein-on Vine in Hollywood, I pulled the horn out and just ripped off a run. And Gary Chin, he's like, damn, you said you sound just like Pepper, And it's weird because the sound all those years just stayed with me because I was consciously trying to play that way on alto and tenor. And just a very aggressive play every solo as if your life depended on it, and to be able to have that feeling also, that how important that was to do that. So, I don't know what much more I can offer, but just to say, man, I really dig all y'all's playing. I love this discussion, and let's turn it back over to Jim, who's been patiently waiting there.
Danny, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Like Dale said, I don't know Dale, but I've heard his playing. Like many of you, I've heard your playing. I've had a chance to play a little bit with Roger a couple of years ago at Berkeley. And yeah, I did have a gig this morning. I have a duo gig, and I decided this morning would be a good morning to lay a couple Pepper Adams tunes on a guitar player who'd never seen them before. So Ephemera, Bossa Allegro, and Bossa Nouveau. It was he was going, what the hell is this? And I said, wow, this is some beautiful stuff. So it is an honor to be in the company of all you baritone players. Claire, I haven't seen in a while, and Kenny. But there's nothing more than a large group of baritone players to make me one happy guy. So I met Pepper for the first time in 1975 at a club in Providence, Rhode Island. I was a a newbie student at Berkeley, and a friend of mine, Sal Spicola. Some of you may remember Sal, great saxophone player who passed away during COVID, the early parts of COVID. We decided we were going to drive down, and I had this Panasonic cassette player, and I decided I was going to record Pepper, but only Pepper, kind of like the way the guy did with Charlie Parker. So we're sitting there and at the bar, and they're just playing, and Pepper's just tearing it up and tearing it up and tearing it up, and it was amazing. And then on the break, being from Providence, I knew the house rhythm section, and they introduced me to Pepper. And it was just, he was really sweet, and I was just a kid, and he couldn't have been nicer. And I said, any chance you'd play Body and Soul? And he says, that's a nice tune. And I go, yeah. And he says, it's in D flat, right? And I go, well, yeah. And he goes, no, I haven't played that tune in years. I said, well, that's okay. I mean, just play a ballad for me, man. Just, and he says, no, I want to play that for you. It'll be fun scuffling on the changes. Well, if I could ever scuffle once like he did, I just hand the horn to the next person, walk out and say, okay, I'm done. I got, because it was unbelievable. And I have the recording of it, the bootleg recording of it that I actually sent to Pepper. I sent him a copy of the cassettes of all the solos, and he was like so happy, and he sent me a lovely card and everything. He was very thoughtful. And I lost all those cassettes in traveling and everything. And years later, Gary Smulyan lent me some bootleg CDs. And don't you think that the Allery recording that I did the night at Allery in Providence ended up being a bootleg CD that Gary came across? So all I can think of is whoever took over Pepper's stuff when he passed away must have taken those cassettes and
That was me.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I cleaned out the house so it wouldn't go in the dumpster.
Devil you. Well, I thank you very much, because, and I'll tell any of you anybody who wants a copy of the Body and Soul recording, it's not the greatest quality, but the spirit.
It's a little raw, but I think my collaborator, John Vanna, is going to be transcribing some of that. He's very fond of Pepper solos on that. So you'll probably hear more of that. And we can get it to you. The show, we can send it to you.
Yeah. But the second night we went back to hear him again, and he asked me, he says, where's your horn? And I went, oh, I'm not ready for this yet. It's just same thing years ago when Roger and I were studying with Danny Bank, and Roger invited me to come and listen to him play with Chet Baker, and then he brought Chet Baker over, and I was scared to death. Oh my God. And then Pepper said, did you bring your horn? It'd be fun with two baritone players. I said, oh, Jesus, I'm not ready for this yet, sir, but thank you. And it's a good thing, because a half an hour later, Ronnie Cuber walked in, and that's all I would have needed between Roger, Chet Baker, and Ronnie Cuber. I probably would have just vaporized, Claire would have my horn now or something, so, but anyway, I love everything about him. I love everything. I love them. There's so many baritone players like Roger. The first one that you come acquainted with is Jerry Mulligan. And I remember him from Narragansett beer commercials for the Red Sox game with a video from Newport. And then being in the Boston area, there was always the great Serge Shaloff. But, Pepper just started tearing his stuff apart. And it was just his use of harmony, like, the ephemera with the 2/5s moving in major thirds, and just his intensity and the great people he played with, and just how nice he was to a kid like me who couldn't blow his nose really at that point. And the first record I ever owned by Pepper was Ephemera. And I just, anyway, before I start crying and get really sappy about this, I remember Claire and Kenny and Roger were at this. Van Doren had a thing a few years ago they do the Vando Jam. And I said one time, we need to have a Vando Jam that's led by a goddamn baritone player. I'm tired of the alto players and the tenor players. It's enough. So he said, well, see if Gary will do it. Then you'll come down and I'm sure everybody else showed up. So when Gary and I showed up at the club, I can't remember the club, about 9:45, there were over 40 baritone players there.
Zinc Bar.
What was it? The Zinc Bar, yeah.
Zinc Bar.
And I said that I used to say that if you walk into a club and there's 2 baritone players on the bandstand, it's going to be the best night of your life. The only thing that could make it better if there were 3. And to have over 40, it was amazing just to be in the company of all those people. So I am thrilled to be a part of this. Gary, thank you so much for your work, and all of you. David, I played a piece on tenor of yours for bassoon and horn in graduate school, and it's nice to be in your company as well. So everybody take care, and thank you.
Gary.
Thank you. Go ahead.
No, I just remember this is one thing. Well, I loved them before, but I'll always love Gary Smullian even more for this. That night, when we started the first set, he was going to, pick who's going to play first, and he said, "Okay, who here is over 50?" And so Danny and Howard Johnson and I played the first set. So I'll always love him forever for that.
Beautiful. Let's move ahead to our Detroit panel. I wanted to get a Detroit perspective. So we have 3 Detroit musicians, Ken Kellett, James Hughes, and Steve Wood. So who wants to start, or do you just want to talk as a group? Whatever you want to do. Ken, you want to start? I know you the best. Steve, you can if you want.
Okay. Well,
nice to see you, by the way.
I have prepared a transcription. I got your invitation, and I thought, well, what can I do to make this something special for me? So I decided I would transcribe Pepper's solo from Just One of Those Things, Lee Morgan, the Cooker. So anyways, here goes. I got about half of it, so metronome there to help.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Well, okay. I'm gonna restart. One more time. Well, that was an attempt anyways. I think it'll give you some idea. of that solo. Pretty remarkable solo. I think really one of the most exceptional parts of it was the spontaneity of it. It was very spontaneous. He doesn't have a lot of he's got vocabulary, but he uses it in such a way. He's starting his phrases at different points. It's just really makes it for kind of an on the edge kind of a performance.
Meaning?
So anyways, that's my contribution.
That's the spontaneity, on the edge. In other words, unusual phrase lengths. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah, he starts and ends his phrases at unusual times.
Sometimes ahead of the beat, sometimes before the beat, never really in the pocket, as Gene Perley
Yeah,
used to
and
say.
sometimes he'll start a phrase on beat 2 or on beat 4, whereas in the past he's it's not typically when I'm using vocabulary, I'll start my phrases at a particular time in particular place. But
Right.
Pepper really is able to start his phrases at all different kinds of times. So
Anybody like that in jazz? Is that really unique to him?
no, I think the best improvisers are able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. James, did you want to comment? You're the other Detroit tenor player. You've listened to Pepper, right?
Yeah. So
welcome to the
thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm obviously, I was born in '75, so I wasn't too old when Pepper passed, so I wasn't aware of his music until after he was already passed. And I'm primarily an alto and tenor player, but when I got into school, I went to Wayne State in Detroit. They didn't have room for me, but they had room for me if I played Barry. So of course I was going to jump in, and I took that chance. And so I really didn't check out Barry players until then. And then it was like, okay, well, now I have to figure this out, because right away I learned that it's way more cumbersome than the alto. And so all my heroes at the time, of course, it's when you come from Detroit is still a bebop town even to this day, and you can't avoid the influence that like Bergh had, because he did a stint in Detroit for a while. And of course, then we had Sonny Stitt here for a long time, and the impact they had on all the musicians at the time was huge. And then that's carried through to my generation and to folks still younger. It's still a bebop town. And what I mean by that is, like, if you get a jazz gig in Detroit, you're going to have to play bebop. You won't keep your gig if you don't play bebop or hard bop.
Or you would have gotten a phone call from Barry Harris if he was still alive.
That's right. That's right. So obviously my influences were Sonny Stitt and Charlie Parker and everyone else that I was playing with and hearing. And then so what was, I had to play Barry sax. So what was I going to check out? So I listened to Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Big Band, of course, and then, heard this guy, like, Pepper, whoa, like, he's playing just like all my heroes, but on Barry. So, and it was really big for me, because there was a lot of obstacles, too, of course, when you're younger, and you want to play with, all the best guys in town, and you might not always feel welcome. And, but Pepper kind of opened up that door for me right away, because, like, well, here's a guy that he could come over, social obstacles and get past the instrument obstacle and still play the music that he loved and that he wanted to do, and the same music that I loved, and I wanted to get better at bebop. And it's that's a tough challenge for anybody, of course. So hearing Pepper be able to navigate those waters so well was it did open that door. It just kind of blew the ceiling off. So I knew that it gave me the confidence to approach the music and to not give up when small things got in my way. So then as a professional, as like a career, I was going to form my own quintet. And so I looked to Donald Byrd and Pepper Adams Quintet kind of as my influence. And what I liked about them is they had a co-led group. It wasn't like just a one person thing. Like, there was the Miles Davis Quintet, but that was definitely Miles' band, with everybody around him. He was such a strong leader. But with Donald and Pepper, they had a co-led group, and I really liked that idea of having kind of two leaders that sound very different, but they have the same background. They both were very true to their own selves, their own sound. And I respected that with Pepper because, of course, in his time, he wasn't the most popular bari sax player. And he played in a very different style than, say Jerry Mulligan, that's already been talked about. But, when you're from Detroit, there's like a blue collar kind of wisdom that everybody has, a level of hipness that's not through the academics. And Pepper and Donald Byrd exhibited that, and their music's very sophisticated, but they stay true to their roots. They didn't get beyond anything, nothing too esoteric. And but what I liked about their co-led group was that each tune was kind of its own story or picture, and the solos and improv, everything still contributed to that one sound for that particular tune. So I'm thinking of the album 10-4 at the 5 spot, and the arrangement of Out of This World, I always dug. It has like such a vibe to it, and the arrangement, the way they used color, not just the fact that it's a bari sax, but just how they arranged everything. His arrangement on the Motor City Scene, I think that's the album, with Kenny Burrell.
Okay.
He kind of uses guitar as like a third horn. Right. Always exploring, like using colors, and then it stays really true to that sound for that song. And then the next tune is going to be different. They'll explore a different color. And so, so that's been kind of Pepper's influence on my playing and on kind of my business sense too.
I really appreciate your comments about Detroit. The one thing I really wanted to do with this panel was get deep into a Detroit sensibility, and you spoke about the oral. You were implying and speaking about the oral tradition and how everything was passed down. I speak about that in my book. It was a very important constituent of how the music was passed down, the informality, all the little joints these guys played in, and how everybody was embraced by their elders, and how Donald Byrd told Eddie Locke once, I never got the feeling that I got in Detroit because of that inclusion and the way people were so in touch with each other. There was just an atmosphere in Detroit that was so important that I was trying to define in the book, because for years I was trying to figure out what it was. And that's a very important part of it. The elders passing the music down and how they included everybody, even at a young age, on their gigs so that people could be themselves and expand what they're doing. Ken, do you want to finish the Detroit panel, and then maybe we'll get to Jim? I sure hope so.
Sure. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Honored to be here.
The only bass player.
Yeah, all these reed players, and here's the rhythm section imposing on you from my undisclosed location here. I'll try not to kid too much. I'm really very honored and very pleased and fascinated to listen to these wonderful musicians, man. There's always more to learn and more history to learn, especially if I may, a quick shout out to Mr. David Amram. I had the pleasure and honor of working with David one time when Doc Holliday brought him out to Oakland University. The Oakland University Jazz Department was really something, man. We grew up on Dizzy's big band book with the Gil Fuller arrangements and Thad and Mel and all that stuff. And I remember what a cool scene it was, and playing with David was fantastic. And what a kind and generous musician, just like Pepper. And we went out for pizza later, and Jack Kerouac's ex-wife was there too. That was pretty wild. Anyway, yeah, I don't know that I can comment on Pepper's music any better than anybody has here. If I may, I would like to echo the sentiments about how it's sort of a responsibility that gets put on you by the older musicians pretty early when you come up in Detroit. Basically, like, represent us good, boy, or else, you know, and know where you came from and whose shoulders you're standing on. And of course, we all cared about that very much. But about Pepper, I can mostly give a few anecdotes about what a genius level guy he was, what a great guy to hang with, and the history I felt with him, and hanging out with him at Pat and Wallis Mead's house, as I told you earlier, Gary. Yeah. Here's Pat Mead and Pepper Adams on the couch, and I'm sitting in a chair. We're drinking Pepper's I.W. Harper, which we'd go to the liquor store every night after the gig. I was very happy to offer my services as a as a chauffeur as well as a bassist, and we had a great time together. And listening to the stories of Pepper and Elvin and all these musicians who we just all revered, and I'm just thoroughly overwhelmed with joy listening to these guys giving me this history. Many times I wished I had a time machine so I could actually see that stuff. Speaking of Pepper's generosity, he was just, I've got charts here. Here's an example. Can you see this chart? This is the bass part, the special bass part, the insert to Rue Serpent that Pepper recorded with George Mraz. And I told him I'd really like to play that. And Pepper he wrote it out, sent this to me, and didn't think a thing of it. And had a wonderful time hanging with him, playing with him. I believe Mr. Kenny Berger mentioned about Pepper's quoting. And that reminded me of what Pepper would do when we were playing at Baker's. Most of you, if not all, are familiar with Thad Jones' tune Zek. And it's basically 1-6-2-5 in E flat at the beginning, right? Well, him being back in Detroit, at the time, Stroh's beer was a thing. I assume everybody remembers Stroh's beer. And the Stroh's beer commercial on the TV a lot then was from one beer lover to another Stroh's beer, 1-6-2-5. So Pepper quoted that just about every time we played Zek, which I thought was really adorable. Also, another thing that Kenny Berger mentioned, and much respect to you, sir, by the way, talking about Pepper's love of Honegger, Arthur Honegger, the French 20th century composer. And I really love talking to Pepper about that because my dad had dug Honegger, and I was a big fan of Pacific 231 and a lot of his stuff. And Pepper was very much into Honegger, and we didn't really talk about jazz all that much. We talked about classical music a lot. He was very much in Honegger, and Pat had a little record player, and they would always put some classical music on the box. And every once in a while, Pepper would like jump off of the conversation for a second and said, "You hear that? There's an excellent example of minor, major seventh chords, you know, in a ditone pattern, like or something of that nature." And we put it back, and I said, "God damn, absolutely, absolutely! What a mind the guy had." And he did think and play at the same time. Absolutely. That was nothing was prearranged about his solos. He was just like a supercomputer, and a supercomputer tied to a massive heart. And what a swell guy! And I was so very fortunate to have played with him many nights and to have hung out with him many nights. And he even came to my pad one time. Steve Wood will remember that because I invited Steve over too, and we sat there and we watched old W.C. Fields stuff I had on my Betamax, because he was a big fan of the W.C. Fields stuff. We would actually trade quotes from that. He had those things almost memorized, the dentist and the golf specialist. And later on, we watched the Lions game. Turns out Pepper was a Lions fan. He told me he remembered when they were the champions. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. And he remembered old stories from the New York Giants. He was just a Renaissance guy, man. It's so down and such a joy to hang out with. And he helped me a great deal too. I'll just finish with one small anecdote, if I may take another second.
Please.
I remember one time I was really bugged with my playing, and I felt like I didn't even deserve to be up there. You know, I suck, man. I'm terrible. Pepper was so nice, man. He says, you know, I was just in New York, and I went into Dizzy Gillespie's gig, and Dizzy told me, thank goodness you're here tonight, Pepper, because I was just terrible last night. I sucked last night. I couldn't play at all. And Pepper says, everybody has good and bad nights, Ken, you know, and I'll always be thankful for knowing him and for being able to spend time with him and Pat Mead and David Amram and Steve Wood and James Hughes. What's up, young brother? Haven't seen you in a while. And Gary, man, you're a champ.
Thank you so much.
My greatest respects to all of you gentlemen, even though you're not rhythm players. It's okay. We'll overlook that. I was really impressed by everybody I heard today. And thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you. So thus ends the Detroit panel. Jim, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hallelujah. We're all eager.
Hallelujah. Oh,
yeah. Take your
my
time,
God.
do your thing. I know it's been very frustrating for you.
All right. First of all, a lot of my thunder has been taken by previous people, Kenny and Roger. One of the things that Kenny mentioned was, you know, how Pepper really, you know, he wasn't a pure bebopper. I mean, you know, there were bebop baritone players before him, you know, like Pee Wee Moore and Bill Graham, Cecil Payne, Leo Parker, Sahib Shihab. There was a guy named Harold Cumberbatch when I came to New York who was like a pure bebopper. But Pepper was kind of took the music to this different level. That when hard bop kind of was this antithesis to the cool school West Coast thing. And Pepper was kind of epitomized that and was one of the only baritone players to play in that style. And like Roger, one of the first things that I heard from him was the More Blues and the Abstract Truth. And it really impressed me a lot because I was already playing baritone, very much appreciated how Harry Carney stood out from the, you know, from his sound. But Pepper's sound had a darkness. I mean, not a darkness, but a brightness, in fact, to it that was different from the kind of almost soft sound that like Cecil Payne and a lot of the others had. And I'm not, you know, maybe that was his setup, maybe it was his approach, but it was very important to me. And also his wit, his intelligence. Again, Roger mentioned his use of the diminished scale. And that's one thing I also want to mention. You know, I studied a lot of, I mean, I find, you know, when I would write down licks that I would hear, and I have pages full of, you know, pencil markings, and scattered throughout are Pepper Adams, you know, I find. And they're very often, they're diminished licks, and he would play all these different variations on the diminished scale. And this is something that I don't think anybody has mentioned, but I am convinced that Pepper practiced his ass off. I am convinced that these were not just all spontaneous, you know, spur of the moment, but that he worked on those, because you can't just, you know, your fingers don't work right away as fast as your mind does sometimes. I think he practiced those a lot because he was able to incorporate them into all different kinds of situations. So that was one thing I want to mention about Pepper. And I think his use of the diminished scale is was kind of unprecedented. And then finally, I wanted to say, because you mentioned, mentioned different, why are we studying Pepper Adams today, and what is his relevance today? And, maybe it's, I'm here in Europe now, but, jazz is, our music is, we live in a don't look up generation. Everybody's looking down at their cell phones, and this music is not appreciated as it should be. It's not alive like it was. When Pepper was coming up, he was working a lot. This music was alive. This music was played everywhere, and he was able to expand his knowledge and develop it. And it's very hard to do that these days. It's just not the same. We live in a different era. And I think if Pepper were around today, he would say, don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to trying to recreate. Don't try to be me. Don't try to be a music that, he was that music. We don't all need to try to be like Pepper. We need to be ourselves and find different venues and situations in which to play. That's kind of something that I tried to do when playing with the sax quartet. I studied with bass players and tried to use the baritone in a way that would give me not only the chance to solo, but also to be the rhythm section. And there are all different kinds of ways, and hopefully we can take this music and bring it back to where it should be. And in my mind, that means we got to play live, because when people are appreciating music only from what comes out of a screen, it kind of becomes kind of two-dimensional and not three-dimensional. We need to play for people. And that means maybe you have to take it to the street, wherever it needs to be done, but that music needs to be heard. That's my 2 cents.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for bearing with it and finally getting hooked up. So I really, really do appreciate that. Are there any questions for Jim or anybody who wants to comment? Where's Aaron? Any questions from the studio audience?
No, not yet. We had that one from Paul Tynan so far. That was it.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much. All right, so we're going to move ahead to our final panel, and since we're talking to somebody in the Netherlands, we might as well move to Rick Vandenberg. Can you hear us?
Yes.
You've been waiting so patiently. You've been here the whole time. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. As a Dutch guy, between all these American, Canadian people. First of all, thanks for this great book. I was reading it during Christmas days, and and the whole list of the links with the recordings.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
But that's the bad thing about the book, that I feel now actually kind of like a beginner again. It was really like, wow, how he was.
Rick is, by the way, referring to the 450 music links that are within the ebook, which I think some people are somehow missing. That was why I was doing the ebook, so that people could hear all this material that I was hoarding, I was collecting. I mean, the only place you can hear it otherwise is when you finally get to William Patterson University, where the stuff is going to be. But Rick is referring to all these audience recordings that I peppered throughout the text. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Glad you mentioned it.
Well, I really, really, really enjoyed it. So the book took longer than only the words. It was a lot of fun. And what's funny is maybe that I can't really recall when I heard Pepper Adams his music for the first time, but I think it was also on that Thelonious Monk orchestra, town hall, and wow, it was really it hit me right away. It was so completely. I was also, like so many other baritone players, listening to Mulligan. I just switched to baritone also as an alto, like a lot of as other probably like that. And it was really like, yeah, it sounds maybe a little bit emotional, but it was really like I had a new friend. It was really, although I'm on the other end of the world in another other culture in a rainy The Hague, and I had the feeling I had. And when I was reading your book, it even became stronger. Like, oh man, it's such a pity that I never met this guy. And I had, of course, talked with people, with musicians in Holland who played with him, Erik Ineke. I heard also that he was sleeping at Eric's place and that he wanted to go to the Gemeentemuseum, the museum in The Hague, and Eric said it took ages, man. He was looking at every painting for wow, it was so what impressed me also a lot in the beginning was I never heard a guy playing baritone with lines from bottom to top. I was very used to chords up, scale down, to simplify it a bit. And now there was someone who's playing really those runs from deep in his horn. So that was really something that was, wow, this is something I had never heard. And I think, well, I immediately bought a few records. I was very much impressed by the Detroit Jazzman and his Cottontail, where he goes in major chords in minor thirds down. It was, well, there were so many surprises. And his fluency on the horn and his articulation. Yeah, it was. And what I liked in the book, there was the quote of Phil Woods. He said something about common clay and he molded into pure platinum. That he was so creative with his vocabulary. And so the ingredients are, when I play it, it sounds like a lick and like a cliche, but he was so creative with it. It was really a super inspiration for me. Well, I don't think I can really add something to it when I hear all those beautiful stories of people who actually met him. So I think this is what I can contribute.
Well, thank you for contributing. Thank you so much for waiting patiently. Really appreciate it. Did you talk to Ryan de Graaf about Pepper?
Yeah, with Ryan.
Because that was his trio with Erik Ineke, right?
Yeah.
Great. Claire, you want to take over? Claire Daly?
Yes, I want to
nice
take
to see
over.
you.
Watch out. Thanks. Wow. Wow, what an afternoon. First of all, you've destroyed my long-held belief that if you put two baritone players in a room together, the conversation will turn into airport horror stories and cases within 5 minutes, always. So we have successfully avoided that and kept the focus on Pepper, which, is only right. And I really also don't have firsthand experience with Pepper, so it's been just a joy listening to all of you talk about him, because you confirmed every suspicion that I have, that he was really smart, that he was funny, that he was soulful. Just the type of human that he was is really the only type of person I'm interested in anymore. Early on, I think somebody gave me the Donald Byrd, some cassettes of Pepper and Donald Byrd, and that was my introduction to him. And I don't even know at that time if I played. It was probably right when I was starting to switch, when I switched to baritone, because I did start on alto. I also, I talked to Dave Sewellson, who's a baritone player, and he reminded me that a mutual friend, Joe Ruddick. Does anybody here know Joe Ruddick? He plays everything. One of those freaky geniuses that really plays, transcendent. He plays music on just about anything you give him. And he ended up with one of Pepper's second horns. It's a silver. Sewellson thought it was a silver. Might be a silver Selmer. I don't know, Gary. You probably know a lot about Pepper's horns.
I think that was around 1980 when he was experimenting with different horns before he went to the factory in France and ended up with his final horn. He was going through a few different horns, and I think the silver is what he was playing with for a while,
well,
maybe for a year.
The silver one has ended up with Joe Ruddick in New Jersey, and when Joe got it, it was in a case, and he opened the case, and he got a bonus of Pepper of a corkscrew and a lighter in the case that were Pepper's. I don't know if he still has those. I have to call him and ask him.
Sounds appropriate.
Exactly. But I really love the 10-4 at the 5-spot record. And I was thinking about the Hastings Street Band, because here's the thing. So Pepper, I think the reason we're still talking about him is because he's a transcendent musician. It wouldn't have mattered what he was playing. He was expressing himself in a pure way, and in the way that I think Coltrane was, and I think interesting. I like the Elvin Jones thing. Elvin Jones on that live at the 5-spot is a really kind of different Elvin than he was just a couple of years ago, a couple of years after that. But I like Pepper had all the chops in the world, and like the Hastings Street bounce on that, he really just like comes into it so slowly and beautifully, and just develops into like this full exposure, and that's to me the difference between Pepper Adams and all of the players that try to be Pepper Adams. A lot of them come out of the gate at 1,000 miles an hour, and I feel like Pepper was, as you've pointed out, so melodic, quoting songs, using his brain in what he was doing, and just he's the gold standard of baritone players. Unfortunately, it gave license to a lot of imitators. Now, some of the people that play in that vein, I'm not taking it away from everybody. I am possibly the slowest baritone player, so I don't want to sound like I'm sour grapes about all the fastest ones. I think that's great. But a lot of the young, they're coming out of the gate like that, and I just feel like, please pay attention to all the details. So I don't know. I love Pepper Adams. I don't really have good stories, as I said, about him. I think David Amram. I remember talking about Pepper and you with Len Dobbin up in Canada, and I think we have that mutual friend there. I don't know. There were a couple. I've thought of a million other things. Thank you for saying that he was a supercomputer tied to a giant heart. Ken said that. And that's it. That's really, we could have said that.
That's the quote of the day right there, Ken.
I think so. A supercomputer with it tied to a giant heart. Because you all have just confirmed everything that I thought. So thank you all, and really that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. I think what we're trying to convey is that Pepper was telling a story, beginning, middle, and end, and everything was connected, and he wasn't just blazing out of the gate, as you mentioned. He really was a unique mind and a unique soloist. Kevin, are you with us? You're still on mute. There you are.
I had been on iPad, and then the battery was going low, so I went to my phone, and everything's that much smaller. And when you're in your mid 50s, everything being smaller is not really a good thing. Uh, double entendre unintended now that I think about that. But anyhow, please edit that out. Moving on. Yeah, it comes to pepper. As I've said before, I'm so honored to be with this group of people. Just to give you my, I guess, a wee bit of background, I started playing the saxophone after hearing Phil Woods, and I didn't even know what kind of saxophone he played. I just knew that that's the instrument I wanted to play. And I had always sung before that. And then when the voice starts to crack, you don't really want to sing anymore. And so, so I started playing the tenor of all things. But I had one of these old tenors that was 3 years older than God, and it had, the low C sharp key was held down with duct tape, and I was fighting the instrument. And I went to a rehearsal, and I saw this shiny saxophone with the curly loop thing around the neck, and I didn't even know what it was, but it was beautiful. And it was new. And I said, I want to play that. Well, it was a Sommer Mark VI baritone sax. So, me, this little chubby blonde kid of 12 years old, gets to play a Mark VI. I didn't know what it was. But, so I became a baritone player, and I hated carrying the dang thing, but I gravitated towards it, immediately. And I was one of those inquisitive kids. I went to my music teacher and I said, okay, if I'm going to play this instrument, who should I listen to? And so we brought in the Downbeat Critics poll, and I know people can say that that's lame, but it gave me a starting point. It was and in small town, New Brunswick, Canada, which is not New Jersey, between Maine and Nova Scotia, my options were limited. And so, I went to our local record store and I picked up one Jerry Mulligan record, and I picked up Ronnie Cuber's Cuba Libre album, and I picked up 10 to 4 at the 5 spot. And I started listening to them, and I love them all for different reasons. And in fact, it's funny, I'm thinking back to what Roger said earlier. I had listened previously a lot to Stan Getz, and I really liked that style of tenor playing. I got into Mulligan, and I wasn't quite ready for Pepper's approach to ballads. I love the way he'd play up tempo, but at the time, the complete and utter lack of vibrato. And, it was my limited thinking, trying to put everything in one box. I didn't become hip to it till later. The other misperception that I had, especially when we're talking about what everybody else has talked about, is I used to have the impression that Pepper wasn't a particularly sentimental player. But I think that he was very romantic, based on the music that he loved, based on the fact that, as people said, he was this incredible intellect with also, a huge heart. I think that's why he probably got hurt so much in his relationships. And, as an introvert, I can see that. And, and I think that carried through in his music, that he had this sense of passion that didn't necessarily have to be schmaltzy. And I really enjoyed that. And Claire, a few other people have mentioned the 10 to 4 at the 5 spot album. In the same way, that song, Hastings Street Bounce, but I also love the Long 2/4, which also became Off to the Races on a different album. And his sense of humor, his quoting, I had heard Dexter Gordon, I'd heard Phil Woods quote, but, I found that listening to the type of quotes he used, and the more I got to know about music and about different repertoire, and I could see the genius in Pepper's quotes and the humor in it. And just to share a brief anecdote about me, when I was in university and I'm in Nova Scotia studying, and all my teachers were from Rochester, Buffalo area, they'd gone to Eastman. And my saxophone teacher, after doing a concert, he said, I'll do my best Buffalo accent. He says, listen, man, I'm not trying to hassle you, but there are certain quotes you should never play in a solo. You played every one of them this afternoon, man. Right. And I took that as a compliment, and I love the guy. He's a dear friend now, but at the time he was so super serious and, very much a Coltrane head. And I love Coltrane, but I really love the players to me that are a lot of fun to listen to. I love Clark Terry. I love Pepper. I absolutely adored Cannonball. Because I was coming, once I got past the Getz thing, although I still love it, it was Nick Brignola and Sal Nistico and those upstate New York guys who played with a ton of chops, but also knew how to play tastefully. And with Pepper, when I started to appreciate his vocabulary, I started transcribing some of his things, and only a few of which I could actually play at the time. But it was such a different approach that, I guess I compare it to, salting sugar. It's not like one is better than the other. The mulligan thing is important within the pantheon of the instrument. Pepper paved the way for the modern approach to baritone playing, though. And I loved what Claire was saying about how a lot of players come at you, and it's right away, it's phasers on kill, to use a Star Trek reference, and players like Pepper, another solo that comes to mind, although I know he didn't love the album, but the album he did with Nick Brignola, the Baritone Madness thing, when Pepper comes in on Billy's Bounce, and his solo is out right away. Harmonically, it's out there, and it's behind the beat, and he's playing with it, and you could tell that he was in total control of what he was doing. But as a young player, I was just thinking, wow, what are you doing, Pepper? And then he makes you pay attention and then pulls you into a more traditional blues kind of solo as he goes, and then goes full Pepper. I just think that was so incredible. And I guess lastly, I found he really influenced me as a fledgling writer. I wrote a tune, and I have a version on your website, but it's a live version. That's not great. But when I recorded my debut album a couple of years ago, I recorded 2 tunes that were in tribute to Pepper. One was Glenn Wilson's Adams Park, which I did as a duet with an upright bass. I thought baritone and bass on that tune would be great. But I wrote a tune called Cayenne. And the idea was I took a bunch of Pepper's pet phrases, kind of like Glenn did, but I did a Latin thing on, but not for me, and used some of Pepper's, sort of pet phrases, like some of the ones I remember. Some of that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, it's funny, like when I'm writing a tune in the cool school, I turn on the warm vibrato and all that, but when I'm playing that fast Latin kind of stuff, Pepper is what immediately comes to mind. And I'm not trying to copy him. I mean, there's so many influences that I've had over the years, but at the same time, he's always there. There's always that influence. Because he wasn't just aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. He just was commanding. I guess that's the best word. And I guess the other thing that I'll kind of wrap up with is I remember when I bought Kenny Clark Meets the Detroit Jazzmen, which I think another gentleman was referring to earlier today, James. And I was a little disappointed because Pepper sounded so subdued. He didn't sound like the Pepper I was used to. Now, until I read your book, I really wasn't aware that that was one of his earliest sessions, and the label probably had something to do with it. But I compared him and Phil Woods in the sense that I said, as time went on, you heard more and more what I called controlled raunch in their solos. They were able to express that side and go out without, resorting to whale song. I'm sorry, this is dismissive to free jazz, but without resorting to the whale song approach of playing out. It still always swung. It still always had this infectious groove and total command of the instrument. He set the bar for modern baritone playing. That's it, really.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you so much for waiting so patiently to give us all that wisdom. Jim Hartog, were you trying to jump in and play something for us, or at least embellish what Kevin was saying, or maybe something earlier?
No,
and we can
No,
hear you.
I'm not. I'm not going to play anything, but it's funny. I saw on a website that Pepper is listed as one of Joe Allard's students, and it's something that Roger and I both share. We both were students of Joe Allard, as was Harry Carney, and Joe was one to really encourage not only your own sound, but the use of the understanding of the instrument and its harmonics. And it's something that always impressed me with Pepper was his ability to get such a clear and full sound out of his instruments. So that's it.
Did you also want to say anything about the intellectualism? We exchanged some emails, and you felt that Pepper was an intellectual player in some capacity. I was just wondering if you want to talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but everybody's mentioned this. I felt like Pepper was a very observant person. He clearly took everything he took in, he was able to translate ultimately onto his instrument. And I think he just was very, somebody, and that's kind of a role model for me as a human being, just being very observant of everything around me. So that's, everybody else has talked about what an intellectual giant he was. But I think, like I say, it's one thing to be intelligent and to be able to use all the mathematical permutations that are available to you as an improviser. But it's another thing to be observant and to understand what the context is. And I think Claire mentioned that too. And it's, I heard Nick Brignola at an early stage of my development, and I was very impressed with him and the instrument. But Pepper was able, as on that record, which is of course not the greatest record of all time, but how Pepper was able to use the context and put it to his advantage, and that takes a lot of intellect to do that. So
you're talking about the twin Barry recording, Baritone Madness. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I say something. This kind of just a kind of a shout out to the Detroit contingent too, was that that ability to kind of go in and out of the changes. Kevin was talking about this solo where he enters completely outside, and two other great players that I associate with having the ability to do that were Thad and Joe Henderson. You guys talk about that Blues in the Abstract, not Blues in the Abstract Truth album. There's an E-flat blues on there by Johnny Hodges. It's just a head arrangement. Blues Almighty. Thad's solo in one chorus. He starts out in the Van Allen belt, and comes right back into the E-flat blues within the 12 bars. And I used to think, man, there must be something in the water out there in Detroit. And Joe Henderson was really great at doing that. And the only other person I can say that is a great example of that outside of jazz was Charles Ives. The Concord Sonata, parts of it start off like a New England hymn, and all of a sudden you're in outer space before you know it, and then you're back. I don't know how those guys do that.
So the one thing I did want to add too, just quickly, is we talked a lot about Pepper's diminished harmony, but I remember one time, a friend of mine was talking about, my use of altered scales, and I looked at him and I said, "What the hell's an altered scale again?" He said, "What do you mean? They're seamless in your playing." And I said, "Go to the piano and play that for me, would you?" And so he did, and I said, "Oh, that thing." I said, "Yeah, I listen to a lot of Pepper Adams." I said, "I'm not really thinking about what it is. It's just a really cool sound, and it sounds great over dominant chords." And which is, again, I can figure out the theory after the fact. But the thing I loved about Pepper is that I think he had this encyclopedic knowledge of theory, but he didn't throw it in your face. He just played really great, hip, long lines that, really got to the heart of of a really great melodic idea. And then after the fact, you can analyze it. I don't think he was analytical in the moment, and I could be wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Could I mention one thing?
Sure.
When Claire was saying about the more than 2 baritone players getting in the room, and all you hear is stories about getting on the airplane and that kind of thing. When we were with the Toronto Symphony, this is 1970, I guess. We went to the airport, and I've said, we have Jerry Dodgen and this and that person. We're here. We're going to play with the orchestra. We were checking in, and the woman looked at the ticket place, looked at Pepper's case. She said, "What is that?" And Pepper said, "This is a baritone saxophone, and this is the case that I put it in, and we're going to be soloists with this concerto with the Toronto Symphony." Very, how he spoke in a very professorial, respectful way. And she said, "Oh, well, about what?" So he gave her a little crash course in the baritone saxophone and what that was. Then she said, "Well, we can't." She said, "Well, can I put it in the closet or somewhere? This is a very valuable." She said, "Oh, it's just," in her mind, I could understand why Prestige Records, when I made one with Julius Watkins, it was called 2 French Horns and 2 Baritone Saxophones, with Coltrane playing baritone saxophone. I'm not sure if Pepper was the other one or not. And they put her on a 16 rather than a 32 CD. They put her on a 16, and Ira Gittler wrote the note, said, "Well, David, they're using you guys for an experiment to see if people will play 16 recordings, because they figured the baritone saxophones and the French horn players don't really belong on a record, so you're sort of in the losers division." So I understood that I guess with the prejudice that most people had at that time of what a saxophone was, probably the baritone saxophone was considered to be like the esophocalite or something that they thought was some kind of a ancient non-instrument. All that being said, Pepper finally said, "Well, look, this is really great." Anyway, we went into a whole discourse for half an hour. Finally, the woman said, "Okay, so for Canadian content, for Kevin and for Claire and everyone else, we finally got a seat with a little tag saying Monsieur, because Monsieur le Baritone, Mr. Baritone." And sure enough, we had a little seat next to Pepper, strapped in, and there was Mr. Baritone, the Pepper's own saxophone in the case, strapped in, just like a person called Monsieur le Baritone. And we had an extra passenger for that instrument. And Pepper was so gracious to the people that were there that he didn't make them feel that they were stupid. We figured that would be the best solution. And of course it was worth it. And he was just such a fun person in that sense. And in dealing with other people, never said, "Do you know who I am?" or made them feel that they were dumb. Or if we were playing at a folk festival and people looked at us and said, "What the hell? What is that?" He was always gracious with people that knew nothing about music formally, but they were interested enough to know what it was and what he was doing. He would take the time to explain that. And he was that way to all of us. So being with all of you, baritone players especially, because I played with Danny Banks and Sahib Shahab and Nick Brignol and all as that were mentioned, as Sahib Shahab and other people. Pepper was someone just on his own. And when I played with Dizzy one time, and we were, after my symphony piece was played, we had a big party and everything. He and Pepper hung out, and Dizzy loved him so much. But Dizzy used to always say to me, "Man, his harmonic sense." And Dizzy himself said, "Man, I'm a harmony freak." But so was Pepper. But as it was mentioned so often, all his knowledge, all his vocabulary, all his languages of all the musics, when he came out, he was just doing it. He had that true creative, spontaneous jazz spirit of just putting it out there at the moment, how he felt. And that's why it sounded so good. He was expressing himself And that's us and all the young folks who are coming up, that when you're done playing giant steps 14 times faster than the world record, and throw in Arnold Schoenberg's greatest outtakes and the bombing of Hiroshima and 46,000 scales from the Solomsky book, that's fine. But the real thing is, as Duke Ellington said, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, and you got to tell your story. And Pepper did that in such a way that he upgraded everything for all of us to learn how to tell our story better. And I guess we're all trying to do that every day and could think about him and do it better.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for adding that, David. Brian, you want to jump in now? I know you've been waiting patiently. You and Cameron have been waiting so patiently. So go ahead.
This is listening to some really beautiful sentiment from everyone and beautiful wisdom. So thank you for having me, and what a pleasure and an honor to be here. So this is a great day. You know, I was first introduced to him. Actually, I don't know where I got it, but I got his record Julian, and I don't know. I was trying to think of what year that was. Do you remember?
75.
Okay, so I gotta say, when I first heard it, I was blown away because of his rhythmic precision, but just coming from Mulligan, as so many others, as in Carney, and hearing these things. And then when I heard that, it was such a different energy that it was shocking, but in a very positive way. Of this is something new. This is groundbreaking. And you know, he was continues to be incredibly influential. And as Claire said, it's fascinating to me. I've had this conversation with many people over the years where there's been many clones, which is obviously the highest compliment, but nonetheless, like Claire said, it's fascinating how most are missing that the romance of the beginning of the solo, of the story, of the actual how we get into this, and what he did with it. So it's I always appreciate hearing him. And you know, there's been so many beautiful things said about him that I just want to give my own perspective, which is I have 2 little kids, and we listen to a lot of music in my house. And so I put on a lot of different albums, a lot of everything from, you know, Zappa was the last thing we were just listening to that they were freaking out about, but I put on everything for them. And my daughter, they both have good ears. She's 8. My son is 6, and you know, they hear all this different music, but it's been really interesting to me to hear what stands out to them, and what they notice. And about a month ago, I put on Julian, actually, and it was playing, and Ruby, my daughter, said she just, you know, she was playing with her stuff, and she said, "Daddy, is this Pepper?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's Pepper. That's right." And it was really, you know, she's done that with a lot of artists, but they're like, you know, like her favorite is Ben Webster, but she loves all these different artists. And you know, she does that with Train. You know, she picks out Train, and Giroux, my son, named after Mulligan too. And Giroux picks out things too, but it's really fascinating to me to hear what they pick up. And it's spiritual. It's not about, obviously, you know, Ruby doesn't care about 3-6-2-5. She's not worried about that. It's much more organic and soulful and heartfelt. And you know, it's not her analyzing the tune and all these things. So to me, that's always been really amazing, that he has such a beautiful sound and an individual sound, which is I think the epitome of what this is about, right? You know, our own path, our own story, our, you know, exploring and learning as much as you can, and then doing what you do. And I think that's really what always sticks out to me with Pepper, because it's his individual approach to the instrument, and the beauty and just everything that he's brought to the table. It's very unique. And just like I said, an 8-year-old who's heard him, you know, a lot, but she's also heard many others. And for her to pick out is this Pepper, that's how unique he is. And I think that's something that always strikes me. And I always encourage all my students. It's like we have to search and explore everything from Hendrix and Pink Floyd and, you know, Zappa, like I just said, and Shostakovich and whoever it may be. You have to explore as much as you can and find what feels most organic to you. And it seems like he was so pure and so honest with his music that there's no denying that. And so I think that's what he brought and continues to bring, that we can all feel. It's transcendent and it's palpable. We can all feel what he was doing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, Danny, did you want to jump in and say something? You're still on mute.
Yes, I have to cut out, and I just wanted to say I retired from Berkeley after 42 years of teaching last May. And this is one of the most brilliant conversations I've ever been involved in. And I'm thankful that we didn't talk about reeds and cases and, you know, what kind of licks do you play here? And is it a 2-5 or where do you draw the friggin' bracket and the arrow? This was really, I'm so blown away. I'm writing notes. I'm looking for CDs, and you guys have been very inspirational. Thank you so much, Gary, for including me in this. And be safe, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, Danny?
Yeah.
Danny?
Yes, Claire.
You mentioned that if you hadn't heard Pepper, I might have your horn now. Are you bequeathing me your horn?
Not yet, darling. Not yet. Do you really want to play a 1934 Con?
Well, I'm willing to try.
I was looking at that horn today. I was sitting there while the guitar player was soloing, and I was just looking at it, and I said, there is nothing about this horn that I don't love. And I'm hoping the Weissman case shows up soon so I can give it a good home.
Great.
So that's the only case conversation I will have with you. David's fallen asleep on that one. So anyway, love you all. Take care.
Hey, Danny, I'll put this up on YouTube, man, the whole thing, so you can watch the very end if you like.
Thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Cameron, you're up finally. Thank you so much for waiting. I know you've been here since the beginning, so hopefully you've enjoyed yourself.
Well, I have, yeah. Thank you. So I'm humbled to be invited to this gathering of minds and musicianship. I really don't know what I can say more. Do you hear me all right, I guess?
Yeah.
All right. I don't know what I can say more than what everyone has said. So it's been really interesting listening to this, and I saw the first round you did with the other group of baritone players, and you know, so I thought I'd stick to the questions you kind of sent out to us. So I mean, Pepper's contribution and his influence on me, I'd have to say it really comes down to sound, and I know a lot of guys and gals talked about that, and just how individual and how unique it was, and how so few people like really change the sound of a horn. You know, there's a few tenor players that do it, but you know, Pepper really did that. And growing up, when I first started playing saxophone, I was more of a tenor player, influenced by Sonny Rollins, Hank Mobley. Really loved Ben Webster, Sonny Stitt, guys like that. I could kind of take or leave the baritone sax. I was kind of ambivalent. I was like, yeah, that's cool, you know. And then when I got to university, a friend gave me a cassette tape of what I grew up calling a Dakar, with Coltrane and Pepper. And
Aaron, can you make him louder? Or Cameron, can you speak closer to the mic? Sorry to interrupt, but you're a little faint. You're talking about the Dakar.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my friend gave me a cassette of Dakar, and kind of like my mind was blown. I was like, this is the baritone sax, and this is what it is. And then, so it got me interested in playing it. I ended up buying a horn, and then you know, Claire brought. I'm in Montreal, and so I got to play this solo with the big band on Scrapple for the Apple, and who was there but Len Dobbin, as she mentioned, and you know, he's like, oh well, you gotta, you know Pepper. And I was like, well, I know a little bit because of this record. And he said, well, you gotta check out this, and you gotta go talk to Andre White. And then I kind of got immersed in it. And
louder, please. So
Louder?
sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you're just fading away. Or I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear him?
There's some
Yes.
distortion or fuzz going
Is
on.
that better? Unplug my phone.
Yeah.
Any better? Okay, I'll try with this. So yeah, so Len Dobbin started hipping me to records, and he was like, got to talk to Andre White, and then I sort of, this love affair I had with the baritone kind of started, and it was all about, well, Pepper's sound. He brought that energy or the edge to it, as everyone said, the way you articulated, and you just made it like this soloistic instrument, and that captured my ear like no other baritone player had, and so that was a huge influence on me. And it's, the question of, 35 years later, why are we still talking about him? I think there's that he's like a once in a lifetime kind of voice that came along, and he was so consistent, and he was, I think Jim was talking about it a bit, but he came along at a time where, jazz was at its creative sort of peak, and also its popularity in some ways. And he was recorded, like, I don't know how many times, like 500, 600 times as a sideman and on all the leader records. So, there's this legacy for all of us, and it's so consistent, and it's so beautiful and melodic, and to go on and on about the diminishing or perfect intervals, but it's just he's a I guess a combination of all these things coming together, being the top dog at this time when so much recording was happening, and being a baritone player, he could play in the big bands, with Mingus or Chet Baker or whoever it is, Donald Bergh. So it was just, I don't know what else I can say. Just his sound, his recorded catalog, it's wonderful.
Well, you're echoing what Roger. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I also have to get going, but I just wanted to say this was fantastic. And you're going to be on past 5 o'clock or what?
I'm sorry?
We're getting
going to be on past 5 o'clock?
No, we're getting close to wrapping up, Roger.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to let Aaron make some concluding remarks, and then you'll all be sent a link to the entire proceeding, so you can relive this.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for participating.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Can I add, Roger?
Bye.
Can
See
I
you
add
guys.
one thing too? One more comment, and
Yeah, go ahead, Kenny.
I have one more comment and one more story. First of all,
stories are great. Anytime.
It was great. I'll tell you another great book that you should all read. I love this book. Is Vibrations by David Amram. Great book. And it mentions a lot of guys that I knew too. It mentions a lot about Jay Cameron, who was another really fine baritone player, and my old pal Dave Kurtzer, who I think played bassoon when somebody mentioned your trio for horn, bassoon, and saxophone.
Talks about Pepper too.
Yeah, Pepper. Anyway, in the early days of Thad and Mel's band, they were still rehearsing. I don't think they played a gig yet. Tom McIntosh brought in this chart that featured a few different soloists, and it had these really difficult changes. I'm not sure if this is the one that wound up on the first record or not, but played it, several soloists played, and everybody kind of had a lot of trouble with it except Pepper, who just burned through it like it was rhythm changes, Dodgen told me this story. And after they finished playing it, somebody came up to Pepper. He says, "Man, those changes threw everybody. How were you able to just make sense of those changes and play through them so easily?" He said, "It was easy, man. Same changes as Death and Transfiguration."
That's great. Yeah, that's a classic Pepper retort, isn't it? That's beautiful. Cameron, you were talking about consistency. It reminds me of something that I quoted from Horace Silver. He said the greatest soloists are the ones that are consistent. That's how they become great, famous, great players. That's their legacy. And you were talking about that. He was talking about Pepper's consistency. I mean, who played with that kind of consistency live or on recordings for 30 years, 25 years? I mean, it's astounding, really. Sure, and it was always him. It was always his voice. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I want to thank everybody for participating. I'm going to let Aaron Lington add a few concluding comments, and I wanted to honor him.
Can I
Unless
add
somebody,
one?
yeah, go ahead.
Can I add one?
Yeah, please.
Just one thing, I want to just mention that Pepper was, as are all the participants here, you got to be a nut to play the. It's a, there are these rods and pads and everything goes out. So you got to have a kind of a sense of humor, and you got to be kind of a crazy nut to want to play the baritone. And I think you have to also maintain a certain sense of humor. So I want to just mention that and appreciate everybody for that, because at least that's how I feel about the instrument. I don't know if you all have that same approach, because it's kind of crazy, one thing goes out, you still got to deal with it, pads, springs.
Never go anywhere without rubber band. Never go anywhere without rubber band.
That's true.
Exactly.
So I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who participated. Really appreciate you doing this, and I know it's a great contribution to understanding Pepper and to the history of the music. And we'll post all of this on YouTube, and you'll get a link to it soon. And I just want to honor Aaron by letting him conclude this, because he's been such a great friend and a great help to hosting both of these roundtables, and so responsive, so professional. So Aaron knows Pepper's music really well, and I just want to give him a chance to say a few concluding words. But all the best to all of you. Have a great year. It's got to be a better year than last year. And Aaron, take it away, and we'll all cross paths soon, I hope. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I'll make this really pretty quick, everyone. First of all, Gary, thanks for the idea of doing this again. The first one was a lot of fun. This one was equally, or perhaps even more fun, because we kind of had a good idea of how to move the thing along. Thank all of you for attending, and the attendees who are not able to talk, but the attendees, some of whom have peeled off. I really appreciate the attendees coming, and maybe they'll hear me say thank you if they watch the whole video later. Before I make a super quick concluding remark about Pepper, since Dave Amram is on as the guest of honor, during the session here, Dave, when I was talking about the concert of the triple concerto here in San Jose, I found the picture here that was taken after the concert. I hope everybody can see it there on the screen, but that was probably 2010 or 11, maybe in San Jose, and that was the jazz quintet part of the triple concerto with the conductor Paul Polivnik, I think is how you say his last name. And Dave, there was an experience after the concert that I had with you that it was a kind of a epiphany moment for me. As I recall, we played the triple concerto right before the intermission, and they were going to play Holst's The Planets right after the intermission. So I put my horn away and kind of went around backstage, and then I went in the back of the theater, and I sat like in the second to last row. There was some empty chairs there, and they're playing Holst and whatever. And it gets to like the fourth movement, Jupiter, right, which is the fourth movement of the planets. And I'm aware of somebody like right here, you know what I mean? And I sort of go like this, and it's you. Your head is like right there. You had sat right behind me, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said something along the lines of, you whisper, because it's during the music, you said, "Can you imagine a human being organized all of those sounds to sound like that?" And it was sort of like a, one of those, you listen to this music, sometimes you can take it for granted, you know what I mean? But I mean, someone wrote all that stuff down so that it sounds like that. And I don't know, it's like, of course I knew that, but I never really thought about it too deeply. So thanks for that amazing experience with you in San Jose. And I relate that anecdote to students of mine who I feel like sometimes are starting to take music for granted. And I relate that little anecdote to them, and I hope that it impresses upon them how amazing of a thing music is in general. So just my closing thoughts on Pepper. I talked about him, about my feelings about him more in depth on the first roundtable. If anyone cares to check it out, it's on. You can find it on YouTube. But after listening to what everyone else said, and a lot of us have the same kinds of opinions and feelings about him. I'll just say that for me, a way to kind of distill down my thoughts from the last one and to make it a little more, what's the word I'm looking for, a little more concise now, is just that he is a guy that was able to supersede what people's expectations of the baritone saxophone were. And of course, that's not to say that that means that one has to play like that, because we all have our own subjective opinions and aesthetic as to what we want to sound like and all that kind of thing. But just from the standpoint of what people thought the baritone saxophone could do in a jazz context, he superseded that. And, for example, and it's too bad Roger had to leave, because I know he knew Michael Berger really well, but the anniversary of Michael Berger's passing was just yesterday or the day before. And Berger was a guy like that on tenor and Coltrane, where you have, like, let's say there's a line going of people that play tenor, and you're sort of always going off that. And then suddenly Coltrane appears, and it's like, it sort of breaks off, and there's this new idea of, it's like, wow, oh, you can do that on tenor. Okay. And then Berger then did that again. And, I never thought tenor could do that necessarily. And then it's out there, and it's like this new standard. Not that everyone has to play that way, but it's this new standard that's out there. And I think for me, that's what Pepper Adams did for the baritone saxophone in a jazz context, especially, is that he superseded what the expectation and what everyone's idea about the instrument was. And so for me, that's maybe in a nutshell kind of the most important thing that he did, in my opinion, anyway. So just with that little bit of closing remarks, I again really enjoyed hearing everyone's comments and insights and all the great stories and anecdotes from Kenny and from Dave and from everybody, Ken, Jim. I mean, I don't have to mention everyone's name, everybody. So just thank you, everybody, for your comments. And I hope everyone has a really happy New Year. It's still January, so we can still wish each other Happy New Year, right? So anyway, Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks for calling in and taking some time out on your weekend to contribute. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. And thank you, everybody. I'm going to jump too, but this has really been wonderful. What a great afternoon. Have a good night.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, you too.
Gary, anything
Thank you all
else?
so much. Thank you for including me in this magnificent group of people.
Same here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My very best regards to you all. And boy, what a joy to see David Amram again. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. And tell everyone in Oakland I send my good cheers.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. You guys are great. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Gary, anything else, man? People are kind of peeling off here, but I think that's kind of concluding, right?
Yeah, I think we're done. I mean, if you don't know about my biography of Pepper Adams, go to pepperadams.com. You can read about it there, and certainly learn a lot more about him from the website too, pepperadams.com. There's just so much stuff there, videos and things. But really appreciate all the content. Jim, especially you, thanks for hanging in, and all the best to everybody. Okay, have a great year.
Oh, there's hey Roger, we're just concluding here, man. So thanks for popping back on.
Yeah.
About you, Roger. Yeah.
And Kenny, thanks for doing this again. Really appreciate your content.
Yeah.
Any of the if you click any of the highlighted song titles in the book, it'll take you to the page with all the recordings.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
People may not know that. That's amazing.
A lot of, and there's so much new material. I mean, people haven't heard about 200 tunes. Rick has heard them, but yeah, that's the feature of the book. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Take care.
Peace.
Thanks for inviting me. Take care.